I am going to beat you into the living death.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Walkout Network. It's your man, Ant Walker, here with the latest edition of the Living Death Show. As always, I'm very excited to start today's program. Of course, we don't have a guest today, but that means we get more time with two people we love very dearly that we don't need to introduce, but we do it so much anyway. So here we go. First up is the jack of all trades, who has mastered them all, the senior editor of Sherdog.com, also the big homie, Ben Duffy. Ben, what's going on, my man?
I'm doing well. We're coming off of an interesting UFC Fight Night card, an interesting Bellator card over in Europe. Plenty to talk about there, and then we're heading right ahead into a big pay-per-view weekend. Tons of stuff going on.
Definitely a lot to discuss. And of course, the man who anchors the panel every week with the stats, the facts, the figures, and the numbers. He is the associate editor of Sherdog.com, also my good friend, Jay Petri. Jay, what's going on today, bro?
Usually I'm excited and everything like that. I'm very excited to be with you guys, but I gotta be honest, I'm starting to feel it. This is the 6th week straight that we've had a UFC card, and it's going to continue on that pace for 2 more weeks, unless you also count PFL, which would then be on April 1st and go on like that. So this is it's a grueling pace that we're right in the middle of, but we keep on trucking, we keep on going, we smile. Stat of the week, I couldn't figure out which one I wanted more. So I'm going to drop 2 quick ones. 49 is the number of takedown attempts Merab Dvalishvili attempted on Petr Yan, which is a record far and away the most it's ever been tried in one UFC fight, which we're going to probably talk about. But the other one, I can't not talk about. Everyone's hero, people's main event, people's champion, whatever you want to call him, Benson Henderson, calling in a career as the only fighter in MMA history to ever fight for WEC, UFC, and Bellator championships. He didn't get the last one, but that's still pretty awesome.
Definitely a wonderful stat to bring out there. And we will definitely discuss Ben Henderson a little bit later in the show. But first off, before we begin our main discussion over UFC, Bellator, and everything in between, remember to like, subscribe, share, tell a friend to tell a friend, tell that friend to tell 10 more friends. Gentlemen, let's go ahead and talk about the main event of UFC Vegas. I guess they just skipped the numbers. If you're rolling with the numbers, it was UFC Vegas 71. But anyway, Merab Dvalishvili had a very dominant decision win over former champion Petr Yan. Can you think of a more impressive display of pressure and pace than what Merab put on Saturday afternoon?
No. And first thing I'll clarify is that the UFC is going to be back onto the numbering system for the Apex cards. They did this because it was at the joint at the Hard Rock to kind of put it alongside the other like full house the fight night events like UFC Columbus, UFC Austin. So they'll be back to 71 in a couple weeks at the Apex. But no, the answer is no. Considering the stakes, considering the opponents, we're talking about somebody in Yan that actually had experience in 5-round fights where Merab did not. We're talking about somebody who on talent and on results was still a top 3 fighter, had never been handed an uncontroversial loss in his entire career. And Merab Dvalishvili melted him with pace and pressure. And it wasn't like he just went out like the Looney Tunes Tasmanian Devil and whirled all around him for 25 minutes. There was so much nuance and strategy to what he did. And hat tip to friend of the show, multiple time guest Blaine Henry of the Fight Library for this one. But the simple fact that Merab came out and kicked Yan's lead leg a couple times to make him get out of southpaw, and he never went back. And then that snatch single was there for the rest of the night. Even the fact that he went 11 for 49 on takedowns, those 38 missed takedowns weren't wasted time or effort. They kept Yan from ever really operating in the boxing at his preferred distance. Like, I thought Merab could have beaten him, but I would not have expected him to outland him almost 2-1 on the feet, which he did, and land with greater power. Yan looked jacked up at the end, and Merab looked like he could have gone 5 more rounds, or looked like he could have fought again next weekend because he had like barely a mark on him. it was withering. It was exhausting to watch in a good way. Yeah, just incredible display.
I was trying desperately to think of other fights where I'm like, oh, that reminds me of when Kane put the screws to JDS in their second fight or something like that, which, you know, had its own merits because it was a heavyweight fight. And obviously the example that people would most be apt to point to is Max Holloway, Calvin Kattar, because of the 400 and something significant strikes he put on him, and just pace and pressure and everything like that. This is a league of its own. This is I can't, like, those numbers look like typos. They look like by a factor of 10 you're off. Like, for Merab to land over 200 total strikes, I mean, that's, you know, knees on the inside and that kind of stuff like that too. It doesn't just include, you know, big punches, but almost 150 significant. And officially attempt 49. I mean, some of them are, you know, the half-hearted snatch singles and the level changes to push him back to the cage. I mean, the numbers don't inflate his performance, but they kind of bolster how ridiculous it was, because some of them were very clear, like attempts to back Petr Yan up. This was not a full-throated effort to ground him. You know, this wasn't a blast double or you're anything like that. This was just a level change attempt, push back, and then let go and then punch him or something like this. But that's just, it's otherworldly. I mean, there's no comparison even for him. We can't even come close because of what he was able to achieve, the damage he was able to inflict, the time he was able to control Petr Yan, a guy who doesn't get controlled very often, and a guy in Merab who has been shown to hit a wall. And I mean, he didn't land a single takedown in Jose Aldo. I mean, granted, he ended up nullifying Aldo because this was the Aldo version. I think, Ben, you said it. That is the Aldo version that he no longer can. He had to choose: do I stop the takedowns or do I work as a striker? Whereas back prime Aldo could stop the takedowns and ruin your life, like when he fought Chad Mendes or Frankie. I don't know what to say about how Merab did it, because this is his first 5-round fight, and his pace was increasing. In the 5th round, he officially tried to go after more takedowns and threw more strikes than the first 4 rounds individually. I don't know, like, I don't want to accuse anything, but you have to wonder, like, right? Like, was Jeff Nowitzki sitting there like licking his lips going, oh, we got a live one here at the end of the fight? Because I don't know how to describe. I don't know how that could happen in a 5-round fight with the wrestling, the grappling, and the striking he put on to do this naturally. I guess that's all I can say.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because when we're talking about fights where we're kind of comparing the pace and pressure to, one of the first ones that came to mind was TJ Dillashaw's first win over Renan Barão.
That's a good one.
And we know what we learned about TJ Dillashaw, you know, several fights later. I definitely don't want to throw that accusation out there either, but it's a compliment, I feel, because that was a massive amount of energy that needs to be put into to put on a performance like that. I'll put it to you sort of like I did last night. I did a guest appearance on the All-Star MMA show with John Hyun Ko, and I like to say that Merab Dvalishvili's performance was like the culmination of his teammate and close friend Aljamain Sterling having 2 fights with Yan. Let's think back to the first round between Aljo and Yan. Merab had that same sort of game plan, only he executed it better with more power and for a longer period of time, which is unworldly to think of. Like, he was on him the entire time, like from bell to bell. He was in his face and he was doing something and giving him way too much input to figure out a solution, to figure out his way from these situations. Even you look at the takedown attempt number. That's a huge number. And typically when you see a huge takedown attempt number or a huge amount of takedowns landed, you know, one of the first things is like, okay, they didn't have good top control. The person that was getting taken down was able to pop back up, and they had to keep rinsing and repeating this process. But this was, you look at that stat and it's just a sliver of the totality of what happened. Like, as you said, Jay, he used those takedown attempts to set up other things. So this was him, you know, looking like he's going for a knee tap, and it turns into an overhand, which turns into a back take, which turns into a drag takedown. Like he had every step of the way sort of planned out of what the routes he wanted to take, and just an inflated takedown attempt number was a symptom of that. I am really marveled by this performance, and I think this is, I'd have to really do a deep dive into some of the 5-round main events that we've seen, but over the 5 rounds, that's easily one of the best performances that I've seen, especially when you eliminate title fights out of the picture. And for it to be so one-sided, I guess we have to give credit to Yan for even standing up to it. But Merab deserves a world of credit. And probably, and I would say whoever is knocking on Dan Hooker's door all the time, looking to watch him take a piss, you might want to stop by Merab's house. Just saying. You're just saying you might want to stop over there and see what's going on with him. But anyway, it was pillar to post, and you're right. It was like Aljo in the first fight. But remember what happened. Aljo is known for having a pretty good gas tank. And he was wiped. He
was spent by the 3rd round. And Merab was not only not spent, he was doing more of that in round 4 and 5. And then at the end of the fight, he didn't fall over dead, like just from a heart attack or something. He was amped up and fired up, and he probably did laps around the theater at the Virgin Hotel after the damn fight. It was just, he
did everything but the push-ups that Clay Guida liked to do.
Yeah.
that was pretty impressive to still have that much energy after putting in a performance like that for 25 minutes nonstop. Just totally nuts.
Maybe count me as the only one that doesn't find this that suspicious. I mean, he'd already been, by acclamation, the guy with maybe the best cardio in the sport right now. We may just look back a year or two from now and realize that all along he had been built for 5-round fights, and we had not even been seeing the full potential of how he could weaponize pace against an opponent. The only comparison I can come up with optically for what he did, aside from, like, you know, Dillashaw versus Burrell, one is Colby Covington at his best, where his opponent just the whole time looks like they've been pushed out their front door into a sandstorm, and they're just overwhelmed. Their brain cannot process all the information. The wrestling doesn't always work, but it just leaves the opponent confused and reeling and on the back foot the whole time and open for the striking. It would be one thing if Merab had middling cardio before and then all of a sudden just unleashed this, but maybe at 30, was he 33 or so? Maybe he's just 32. Mm-hmm. He's just kind of evolving into his final form right now.
It's possible.
There was something Dean Thomas said, last thing I want to say, about how we always talk about how certain fighters approach fights strategically. John Jones, Petr Yan, they give up the first round. They're downloading the information. You know, we have the computer analogy, and they're figuring it out. They're trying to put it all together. And what Dean said after the fight is that he overloaded Petr Yan's computer by giving it too much to handle too long. And so Yan was never able to download and process it because he was constantly having to deal with something that was just a little different. Like, yes, we can, I think you or Keith Schillen on the recap show for Sure Dog said that, yeah, sure, half of the 49 takedowns may have been the same exact type of snatch single, but they were just a little different look or a different angle or a different approach, or they were against the cage to set up an overhand right or something. It just was too much for anybody to figure out.
And he was taking, like, in addition to giving him more than his computer could handle, he was harming his hardware. By the end of the first round, not only did Yan not have a beat on him, Yan had lost the ability to go orthodox, which constant stance switching is one of his biggest weapons. And Merab had already taken that away. Like,
from like 5 leg kicks? I couldn't figure that. I remember like they said that on the broadcast, like he's hurt. I'm like, how? But because I thought I saw Petr Yan checking kicks, but apparently not.
It was even, I think they even said on the broadcast, like the way the checking the kick the way he did or something exposes you to some other sort of damage. And especially when by the time his leg was already damaged and he's trying to check, like it's kind of too late at that point. Like your leg is still getting battered. So I definitely love to see this fight. And this is one that I think it was so much to process that I think even, like you and Keith do a very good job as far as breaking down technique in real time and explaining and analyzing. But I think even guys like you who are good at that will have to sit and digest this one. The same way Yan couldn't process it all at one time, I don't think us outsiders will be able to do that as well. This is going to be a fascinating one to break down technique by technique when it comes time for Dvalishvili's next booking, which I think sort of good segue into our next topic here. So bantamweight contendership picture is very, very, very interesting right now. If you had to matchmake it, who's getting the next title shot? Who's next in line? What does it look like in your perspective?
I like what, honestly, Aljo and Merab have talked about for a year or so. Aljamain Sterling has said that if it comes to the point where Merab is the next in line for the title, I'll move up to featherweight. As it is, he's booked to fight Henry Cejudo in May. That seems to me to be a perfect fork in the road. If Sterling beats Cejudo, Sterling moving up to 145 and Merab fighting Sean O'Malley for the vacant title would seem to make the most sense to me. I mean, they could have Cejudo fight again for the vacated title off of a loss. The UFC has done that many times. I don't love it, but if they did that, fine. But they've brought O'Malley up as prudently as they can. They've kept him away from real lights out wrestlers. But considering that now there's Aljo, Cejudo, and Merab orbiting, he's going to have to fight one of them. It might as well be for a title, where at least you got some hope of a Hail Mary type thing. So yeah, if Aljo wins, give me Merab versus O'Malley for the vacant title. If Cejudo beats Sterling, I would still love Sterling to just move up from there and let Merab fight Cejudo as the most obvious of obvious first title defenses. You still have the intrigue of I'm avenging my teammate, my good friend. We're not stuck in another Aljo versus somebody, back and forth or trilogy that wraps up the division for another full year. So yeah, either way, it all hinges on Aljamain Sterling moving up this summer.
It's a weird place that I've been looking at this division, and I am very famous for getting fussed at on the show about my discussion of the depth of bantamweight at the top echelon of his division versus heavyweight. At the time, I suggested the top 7 of heavyweight looked more impressive than the top 7 of bantamweight, and I was very loudly harangued for that, and I still stand by it. I look at bantamweight, and it is an incredibly deep division, but it's not a deep division because of its top 15. It's a deep division because of its 16 through 25. The guys who are on the way up, the Martinez, the Nurmagomedovs, there's a couple of them. It's not. I look at because otherwise you're going to have to shuffle people around. Rob Font is several wins away from a title shot, and he's number 6. So then, and Dominic Cruz is number 7, and neither of those guys are going to sniff one anytime soon if they keep fighting. I feel that somebody's going to get left out, and I know who it's going to be, and it's the wrong person. Chito Vera should get a title shot before Sean O'Malley, period. I mean, what he's done, who he's beaten. Chito Vera, should he get past Corey Sandhagen in San Antonio, which I think he's going to do, will have beaten Sandhagen, Cruz, Font, and Frankie Edgar, and Davey Grant in rapid succession. The weak link is who? Frankie Edgar now? Maybe, but that's to me, that's more than a really close decision over Petr Yan. for that situation. I feel like Merab's in the situation like Bilal Muhammad, like Arnold Allen, like Leon Edwards for a while. Like they're going to have to keep fighting even though they're on a ridiculous win streak. So I don't know if Merab beating Petr Yan is he's getting the next title shot just because of the names that still have to fight for it. I also am kind of confused. Aljo moves up to featherweight for good.
Mm-hmm.
Does he move up if Merab wins the title? Does he move up if Merab fights for the title, the vacant title, and then loses and goes back to the line? Does Aljo go back down? Does Aljo skip the line at 145 and now he's fighting for a title before Arnold Allen gets to, because Arnold Allen's busy with Max Holloway? There are questions that I don't know if we're going to get answered anytime soon. And do you think the UFC wants to give Merab a title shot with or without Aljo on top? Like
I don't see why they wouldn't.
Dana did the whole you don't want to do the Cesar Gracie scrap pack thing of I'm not fighting my teammate. He made that very clear the other day.
Yeah, but I think he's only saying that because of the circumstance that we're in right now. If Merab and Aljo have built each other up to what they are now, so let's pretend like that isn't the case, and that Merab came up from any other camp in the world.
Sure,
Merab is next in line.
Yeah.
Presumably, like he's at least in the conversation. If it's not going to be O'Malley, if Cejudo wasn't booked, whatever, Merab is right there. At the very least, you're looking at a replacement fighter for an upcoming title fight. At the very least, so this is a situation that those two men have created, Sterling and Dvalishvili. They've created this situation. So of course Dana's going to comment on it like that. But I'm kind of, Ben, I like your idea, but there's one big flaw with the idea of Aljo moving up should he beat or win or lose against Cejudo, because that would represent a great sort of figurative fork in the road as far as a career arc is concerned. But if you're Aljo, you beat Cejudo, are you going to give up the fight against O'Malley? Because that's your money fight. That's the money fight in that division.
Do you think, is that the money fight, or is the money fight him as the champion going up to fight Alex
in that division?
Fair.
But it's right there and it's available, and that's a very winnable fight for Aljamain Sterling. If I'm him, I really, really want that O'Malley fight, because that's the one that's really going to pad my bank account. That's the one that's going to sell. And then we can talk about moving up. Does Dvalishvili want to wait that long? We've seen some camps we've seen like things happen at ATT as far as two guys moving up for a title shot. We've seen the way Daniel Cormier and Cain Velasquez handled their greatness at heavyweight, that, one separated himself from the weight class and whatnot. We've seen these things play out, and they've all gone in different directions. And we're not that far removed from like a contender like Costa Philippou leaving Serra-Longo because he was in the sniffing distance of Chris Weidman's title. Of course, that didn't play out too well for him, but we've seen this happen. So these guys are saying this now. They are saying this now. They may not say this, for much longer, because no matter what, you still want to be a champion. You still want to claim the top prize. You still want to claim the top dollar. At some point, that might erode away at the friendship that these two have, or at least make them more open to setting it aside to compete against one another. Or, like I said, it could be Cormier and Velasquez, where their friendship is that deep to where it's not worth it. I've had conversations with both Aaron Pico and AJ McKee about the same thing. Like, hey, they've been friends since they were little children. Like, yeah, this means more than our fight careers. We are friends to that extent. This could be that. We don't know for sure, but I have a feeling the dynamic could start changing in some way, shape, or form in a visible way to us.
There's one other little thing here, and it's something that comes up anytime there's one of these situations and very rarely comes to the forefront, but Merab let something slip in his post-fight interview, because his post-fight interview was almost as big a display of cardio as most people's fights. But he said, Aljo and I both know who the real champ is. Usually when two guys have been training together that long, they both have an idea who would win in the cage. I mean, it goes back as far as Tito and Chuck.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where Tito was the bigger name, the champ, the higher ranked guy, but Tito knew that Chuck was going to beat him. I wonder what it looks like when these two guys go at it, because they are each other's primary sparring partner. And this ain't ATT. ATT is 3 separate camps, all of which are bigger than Serra Longo under one gigantic roof.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if you train at ATT under Mike Brown and you train under Conan Silveira, you might as well be 2 different camps that use the same bathrooms. You know, it's a huge complex with, you know, hundreds of fighters. It makes me wonder.
Lakers and Clippers playing in the same building, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder if they both know that Merab is way better, or they both know that like he has nothing for Aljo. And I don't know which it is, but I wonder if there's, you know, some of that dynamic going on as well.
Yeah. And then we can't even discount like just friendly competitiveness. You know, as well, like that could have been most likely a very revealing statement. Also possible it could have just been a friendly jab, just, you know, that they go back in the locker room and they just laugh. It's like, man, I can't believe you said that shit to me. Because that's they got us all. That's something like if one of us 3 were in that situation with each other, like we probably would do something like that.
Yeah.
We'd probably make little friendly jabs and just have fun and laugh about it, have a beer later. Like, so it could have been that situation too. I mean, it's just so many different angles to look at. Got to be giving Dana a headache though, right?
Dude, here's the thing that I keep thinking. The UFC does not like Aljo Sterling as a champion, does it? Like never has like this was the didn't Dana threaten to pull Aljo's title, strip him after the neck injury after like 3 months out because he had major neck surgery done. So the UFC has always wanted to get rid of Aljo. I feel like Merab's in that same boat, that same circuit, maybe even more, because he's even more aggressive as a grindy, I guess is a word, but a relentless wrestler. I feel like the UFC wants O'Malley so badly to win this title, and they want Merab and Aljo out of all that picture.
They better root like crazy for Cejudo.
Yes.
Because Cejudo, despite being the most credentialed wrestler, is the one that O'Malley probably has the best chance of beating, just because he's way bigger and Cejudo doesn't always wrestle. And also Cejudo would be the most likely guy to win the title and then flake out again and disappear for 2 more years and let O'Malley slide into a vacant title thing. So they like Dana better be like lighting candles around his little shrine to Cejudo in his house right now. Because Aljo or Merab take Sean O'Malley to the woodshed.
Yeah, that's a rough day at the office.
Like you might as well bring like O'Malley a pillow and a blanket, because he's not getting up for 25 minutes.
It would look like, to me, do you remember when Khabib fought Abel Trujillo and took him down like 22 times
and they all hurt,
and every one of them and every one of them was a slam, and yes, he got back up, but that was the
DV rate in Florida actually dropped after that fight for a couple months because Abel couldn't beat up on his women anymore.
He's like, woman, I would, but my back.
Bring me some ibuprofen. Bitch.
Yeah, it's like and bring me that high school yearbook so I can lust.
Oh shit.
All right, fellas. Well, let's go ahead and move things along, because we did have some activity in the heavyweight division. Alexander Volkov with a serious win over Alexander Romanov. A lot to unpack here in what very little action that we saw. Was this about how good Volkov was or how bad Romanov seemed? And I think I know what we're going to say, but it's going to be fun. So let's say it anyway.
I feel bad for Alexander Volkov. He has relatively few chances left to prove that he deserves a title shot at heavyweight. There just aren't many guys in the top 10 he hasn't beaten yet. Romanov was it. And Romanov was the perfect chance to prove himself, because he was a kind of overpowering wrestler that has given Volkov trouble in the past. He was actually ranked higher than, or if not ranked higher, he was at least favored over Volkov on the books. Like, you beat Romanov convincingly and you got a nice feather in your hat. And he beat him convincingly, and all we're talking about right now is how shitty Romanov looked. I feel bad for Volkov. Like, and I say this carefully because I also am 30 pounds over my ideal weight, but unlike Alexander Romanov, it didn't all happen in the last 6 months. You know, this is a lifetime of work. And it's not even a regression to the mean. I mean, Romanov weighed 266 when he got to the UFC, dropped to like 238, and now he's back at 265. But he looks so much worse now than he did a couple years ago when he got to the UFC. Fighters react differently to their first career loss. And maybe something just snapped in Romanov because he looked disinterested during fight week. He looked untrained on the scale, and he fought like he had one little gasp in him and was stymied by a single fence grab. I mean, a good heavyweight, it takes at least 2 or 3 fence grabs to beat him, and Volkov only needed 1. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Now Volkov's got to set his sights on Sergey Spivak, I guess, because he's like literally the last guy in the top 10 that Volkov hasn't already fought. But yeah, this one's mostly about Romanov, and that's a shame.
It is. You learned a whole lot about this fighter. There's always a tendency to look at some 12-0 fighter that comes out of a region that isn't known necessarily for the most competitive fights to grow them. We always make fun of in Brazil, Astrofight teams, Aspire FC, and everything like that builds fighters on 0-4 opponents. And you look at Romanov's record and you go, oh my gosh, his best win coming up to the UFC was over Bellator vet Virgil Zwicker. This is not a guy who was necessarily tested. And then you look at his resume in the UFC and go, oh my gosh, he was destroying people. But who was he destroying? Roque Martinez, Jared Vandera, Chase Sherman, Marcos Rogério de Lima, who has the worst ground game this side of Greg Hardy, and the Juan Espino thing, which, whatever you want to call it, was a mess. And that was the one step up.
And was a bit of a preview.
And it was a wall. And then he fought Marcin Tybura. And yes, I thought it was a draw too. The first round, I gave it a 10-8. And then Tybura took the next 2. But that was the wall. And this was that Tybura fight was, I realized after watching this Volkov fight, that was the moment that we're going to look back in 2 years when Romanov's out of the UFC and going, oh, that was his ceiling. Mm-hmm. And that's really too bad because Ben is right on the money. This should be Volkov destroyed a guy that had never been finished, hadn't ever really even been hurt, other than his own fatiguing himself and looking tired. And yet now we're looking at Romanov as a lower ceiling bust than Volkov is now a first round finisher again, which he hasn't been in so long. Volkov, for all intents, should be a top 5 guy, but he can't be because of who's beaten him. And that's really too bad. Like I said this in the Sherdog rankings discussion panel that we had, that Volkov will always be behind Tom Aspinall because of what happened in their fight. So no matter if Tom Aspinall goes to number 1, that's great. But if he doesn't, then he is stuck behind that bus forever. And more so than Lewis, the big knockout or the Blades takedowns, that's the high watermark. Because otherwise, I think Volkov right now, I think he gives John Jones a fight. But he's not going to be able to get that fight. And that's really a shame. Even though he has 10 more years left in him because he's only 34. That's really a shame.
I mean, he and Jones are basically the same age.
Yeah, that actually will be a much better fight than if you think about the dynamics a little bit more. It's very difficult for me to really assign blame properly. We'll just pass it around to both gentlemen because they both have big asterisks next to their performances. Because obviously Volkov grabbed the fence and it was a crucial fence grab because had he not grabbed the fence in that moment, 99% of the time he'll get put on his back and God knows what's going to happen to him there with someone like Romanov on top. Also, though, if Romanov didn't come in looking like he tried a McDonald's from everywhere from Romania to back, if he didn't eat a Big Mac every stop that he made along the way, maybe he has more cardio to not, get stopped on one takedown attempt and then all of a sudden just wither away. This was, you kind of don't know what to go with. So I'm going to just go with the guy who won, even though he won by questionable means, because the other guy partly his fault for not showing up in optimal shape. Like I'm curious what the story is behind that, because I don't, we've seen fighters who were previously undefeated take a loss and go through depressions. And like the thing about like Ronda Rousey after her first loss, and she went through a serious depression that she talked about later, even contemplating suicide and whatnot. Like fighting is such an emotional thing that when someone does take that first loss, it's a big, big step sometimes to just step into the cage again and just see what they have, or even step into the gym and see what they have to offer. So I wonder what the story is, but from what we saw, Volkov should be treated like he won a first round finish. I say perhaps this is a good time to rematch him and Cyril Gane. Cyril Gane certainly needs to work on his grappling chops. That would be like Volkov will be the perfect canvas for that sort of thing. And perhaps that wrinkle means that the fight could be more exciting than the first one was. That'd be my pick. So what's your pick for potential matchups for Volkov?
I like the Spivak matchup. Ironically, Spivak also comes from the same little country as Romanov. They're both Moldovan. And Spivak came to the UFC on the back of wins over Tony Lopez and Travis Fulton. So, like, mediocrity was in the cards, and he, struggled in his first couple fights, but he's moved past that, and he's done some of the same things Romanov did. He's like, physically, he looks much better. He can actually, unlike Romanov, he can actually make his wrestling approach work over 3 rounds. Like, he's earned a shot at a bigger name, and that's Volkov. And Volkov, again, if we can get him a top 10 matchup that's not a rematch, I do favor that. So I like Volkov versus Spivak. And honestly, that sounds like a fight night main event, and not many people would have to twist an ankle for that to turn into a de facto title eliminator.
No. You know what, Jay, sorry to step on your toes, but I'm glad you brought that, because it's important to remember that Romanov could not pull off the win against Volkov in the smaller cage. Like,
yep.
That's a huge disadvantage for Volkov to be in the smaller cage. Yep. So I just throwing that out there, Jay. Sorry to step on your toes.
No, it's a great point. I'm going to go off the reservation a little bit, and a fight that I personally hate, because I'm of the Joe Silva type of matchmaking mindset of winners fight winners. But since that doesn't happen anymore, I'm kind of falling back to earth, and I'm going to give Volkov Tai Tuivasa, because I've never fought. Mm-hmm. It's a striking match that Tuivasa may be able to get moved on. Tuivasa's only 2 losses in a while were over Sergey Pavlovich, who it turns out is top notch, and Cyril Gane, who he had him on the ropes. I think that would be a fun, interesting striking match, because would Tuivasa be able to do the Derek Lewis? He's capable of it. He throws bombs, or would Drago use front kicks and brutalize his body? I don't know. I like that. Maybe the Spivak fight makes more sense, because you want to reward Spivak for his good performance. But he already is currently ranked above Volkov as of right now, which is surprising. It's weird. For Volkov, that's probably about all I want to give him, because then otherwise you don't want to give him Pavlovich. That doesn't make sense. And he wants Gane too, and I guess so. I'm gonna kind of like split the difference and go Tuivasa.
All right, cool. All right, fellas. Well, let's keep things pushing here. We got quite a few topics to get to, so let's rapid fire our way through the next couple. And we're going to bring back a little segment that we call Swing or Miss. So, Swing or Miss. Nikita Krylov is a legitimate light heavyweight contender after his win against Ryan Spann.
Yes, because it's light heavyweight. Krylov at this point is what he is. He's still an inconsistent fighter. It is almost exactly a year ago that he dove straight into a triangle from Paul Craig, who only does triangles. Like, he did the only thing you could do to lose to Paul Craig. And that's a year ago. But having said that, it's light heavyweight. It's long on talent, short on fight IQ. At this point, all he'd need to do is keep the bad Nikita locked away in the closet for about 2 more fights, and he's in the title picture. Like, it's a wide open division. He has all the offensive weapons. He just needs to keep Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde apart for a couple more fights.
All right, good answer. Jay, I'm going to ask you the next question here,
Yes.
and I'm curious if you're going to give the answer that I'm expecting here. We'll see if I'm reading your mind on here. Is Usman Nurmagomedov a top 10 lightweight in the world after his title winning? Well, he already had the title defending performance against Benson Henderson. Is he among the top 5? Is he the best Nurmagomedov active right now?
Well, I know my answer is going to be no on the best Nurmagomedov because Khabib is not retired.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear.
And he'll fight again soon.
I don't even care about the rest of the question.
Yeah,
that's really what I want to hear
right.
from you. But yeah, please answer the rest of it.
Yeah, I guess the rest of it. In terms of the other current Nurmagomedovs, what he did to Ben Henderson was something that was truly impressive. The kick, just the kick itself. I said, I forget if I said it to the Sherdog teammates or I was saying it to somebody I was watching with, but you could frame that kick. If you could like frame a GIF and put it on a wall and let it run, what he did with that question mark kick to get up there and ring Ben Henderson's belt was incredible. That is not something that a guy you would expect from that last name. And in terms of a top 10 or top 5 guy, I really feel for Bellator lightweight divisions if they want to break out into be a worldwide ranked, because the division is it's not light on talent, but it's light on the talent that they're trying to put together to make a ranked fighter that you can look at and go, oh yeah, he would put the screws to Jalen Turner or something like that. And I don't think he is right now, just because his resume includes exactly Ben Henderson and Patricky Pitbull. That's his resume in terms of, I mean, yes, he has a couple wins. He beat like CG Lion Gonzalez, but does that make a top 10 guy? I don't think so. Not yet. Maybe if he wins the tournament, we'll talk, but not now.
All right, not mad at that answer at all. So let's see here. Let's and of course, like as soon as I'm trying to press this button, my screen froze for a second. So like, I couldn't even pull up my outline. All right, so next question.
Let me throw one your way. I'll throw one your way.
Of course.
You watched the other tournament finale, the other tournament fight in Bellator, right? Chablis and Messiah.
I did not finish watching that one. Okay. I was having trouble with my stream, so I couldn't finish that one.
Okay, well, I'll ask Ben that question after I ask you a question. So you watched Jonathan Martinez. You watched this versus Said Nurmagomedov, in a Nurmagomedov that actually lost a fight, which is like well, I think that Aaron Bronstetter was. Well, no, actually, Aaron Bronstetter picked against Nurmagomedov, even though the Magomedov line that had. Do you think he actually beat him? Do you think Dragon Martinez beat Nurmagomedov?
Yes, I do. I do believe that Martinez won. It's a very close fight, but I think Martinez did exactly what you're supposed to do in that scenario. If plan A isn't working and you can't beat someone on the pure violence of the fight, well, turn it into a game, turn it into a contest, slow down the pace, and take away a lot of those weapons. Like Nurmagomedov he's so good at kicks, but he's also really good at the wrestling as well. By jamming him up like that in the clinch, you shut down the kicks, and you also get a better feel for what the wrestling is going to do. So I think Martinez played that perfectly. It looks like a solid win in my book.
All right, let me jump back to Bellator then. I'll keep that going because I did promise a question to Ben, whether he likes it or not. It's going to happen. So you saw the Bellator Chablis Messiah fight, Jay, which just for a little bit of backstory. Spoiler alert! And cover your ears, earmuffs. There was the body kick that struck the groin. And Jason Herzog claimed that it was a legal blow that had incidental contact with the groin and therefore wasn't a foul and should be ruled the way it was. What do you think about that, Ben? Is that copacetic? I know you've been through the training.
I think Herzog actually goofed the call here, and that's very rare for him. I think he's probably the best ref working right now. But yeah, and most importantly, kind of failed to control the situation. Like, he made the best of it that he could, but by that time there was no real question of giving somebody legitimate time to recover from a foul. Like, yeah, he kind of failed to control the situation. And honestly, Coker almost like tried to cover for him at the post-op or the post-op. I worked in medical too long. The post-fight presser. I mean, he might have needed his nuts pulled back out of his body cavity. It might have been a post-op presser, but saying, yeah, I think he had broken ribs or something. Like, okay, Dr. Coker. Yeah, because plenty of people ran with that narrative. No, he broke his ribs. It was a legal shot. I was like, no, Coker said, I thought he broke his ribs. Like, like Bellator's got too many amateur doctors sitting around the cage. Like Big John McCarthy is diagnosing the tendons and ligaments of the lower leg, through an MRI that he has embedded in his skull. Apparently, Coker is using tarot cards to say that people got broken ribs. I don't get it. I think this was a bad call on Jason Herzog's part.
Yeah. Incidental contact with the groin just isn't a thing. See, that's just not a thing.
It's not a thing, and I think that, and I might discuss that when I go to the ABC conference with some commissioners. I might discuss intent is a factor for a lot of fouls. Intent to commit the foul. Did he intentionally strike the groin? Did he accidentally strike the groin? Was it while a kick came up and did it? I don't think intent should matter because the damage was done no matter what the fighter's state of mind was. And also, spoiler alert, you don't know the fighter's state of mind. Like, Cheick Kongo might very well be the sweetest and most unlucky fighter in the history of the sport. And he goes home crying after fights because he didn't mean to foul and what have you. Or on the other hand, Mike Kyle is an evil mastermind who knows exactly what he's doing when he fouls the people that he fouls all the time. Intending to strike the groin or accidentally striking the groin hath been struck. If it's not a debate that you can really push for.
Ask not for whom the cup tolls. It tolls for thee.
Whether you stick your hands out to push off and a finger goes in the eye, or if you go like this and lead and spear them in the eye, or if you do the Three Stooges.
The Three Stooges, yeah.
It doesn't matter because the eye has been damaged. So I think that the incidental contact ruling, and I am right with you. Jason Herzog is a gold standard of the sport. But if the groin was struck, how do we know how much it hurt? How do we know how little it hurt?
Yeah.
We don't know because we didn't get our groin kicked. So it's a tough call. And I feel like it felt like, honestly, when I think about it now, it feels more like when Fedor was fighting Kosaka back in rings, and the rings had the tournament where the winner has to move on. Well, Fedor was fouled by an illegal elbow, and he was cut from the elbow, and he was forced out of the fight. He lost the fight that he shouldn't have lost because somebody had to win the fight. Mm-hmm. This was kind of like that situation where he won the fight, where Kosaka won the fight, even though he got the foul. Shabley won the fight, even though he had the foul, and the show must go on. Anyway, here, take the wheel again before I go.
Oh, not a problem at all. Okay, so it's Ben next.
You're muted, Jay.
Oh yeah, Ben can ask the questions.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Ben. Ask one of us a question.
Assign a question, yeah.
Ant, is Michael Venom Page one of the most vicious finishers in the sport?
Absolutely. Like, you see my man's knee cave in on that one kick. Good Lord. Like, I had to rewatch that thing several times just to make sure I didn't miss something as far as a technique or something. Like, did he do something? Like, no, he caved his knee in with a single kick. This is the same guy that's crushed a man's skull in the cage. Michael Venom Page is probably the most vicious finisher. Now, of course, that has something to do with the fact that a lot of those fights were against, ice cream vendors and whatnot that were working in the arena. But this time he did it to like a really legit fighter. So yeah, MVP, one of the best finishers in the game, if not the best. Let's see who's asking the question next. I think I'll take the wheel back.
Ben still got a question for me.
Ben still got it. Okay. All right.
Am I missing number 2 or number 3?
Pick we got 2, we got 3, and yeah, 2 and 3.
All right.
What's left over?
Jay, What did you make of the uncalled fence grabs in fights like Petrino versus Takali and Volkov versus Romanov?
We need to have a referee powwow. We as observers of the sport need to have the referees get together and determine how they will assign and address these kinds of situations, because the inconsistency that we have here is off the charts. And that is not to assign blame to a Mark Smith type or to give laurels and flowers to Keith Peterson for his point deduction of a fence grab or the uncalled fence grabs, whatever. I'm of the mind where if a referee has to step in and slap a fighter's hand out of the cage, then it's an egregious enough foul that needs to be called. I like the trend, and this is something we learned in the ABC course, the trend that has not started, but kind of rumbled a little bit, where a referee has the ability, the authority to take a point, to assign a point deduction without disrupting the action. They can call out 1 point and keep things going. I think that should have happened in the Assunção fight, for instance, where he stood them up and took away the position. I think just the taking a point for the foul and then keeping it where they were would have been appropriate. I think the case for what was it, Tricali trying to escape and pulling himself up the fence to do that and then still being pulled down was another one of those. Okay, 1 point, but keep it going. But we need to have some sort of consistency where we know you're not getting away with it. Because I think in one fight, I wrote in the play-by-play, there were like 6, 7, 8 fence grabs, clear, egregious ones. And that's not good.
Hey Jay, let me run this by.
Please.
I mean, both you guys are, taking some officiating training and whatnot. My solution would be for a lot of these cases, if someone grabs the fence,
you chop the fingers off.
Yeah, that actually would be. I mean, that might be something to roll out on Fight Island, but you could just, I say, reset the position, put the guy on his back. Stop the action, lay him on his back, let the guy who was going for the takedown get on top, and then you restart them.
I think the downside of that, I'll answer that and Ben can chime in too, is that means you're assuming that the takedown was completed, that you're assuming that they were able to secure this position and maintain it accordingly. So I think that once you're filling in the gaps, I think that's a problem. Like who are we to say that he wouldn't have posted off and something like that?
Who's to say the guy was even going for a takedown?
Yeah.
Maybe he was trying to take his back standing. Maybe, like it's like anything that involves more intervention by the ref, like I prefer to shy away from.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it's an idea, and people have thought about that, awarding the position, but I think the only thing they can do is the one.
All right.
I mean, it was who was it that said it? I think it was Felder who said it. Is if you penalize groin shots or eye pokes or something on the first one, it will stop within 3 weeks. They would stop because everybody would be afraid of it. It was in the Petr Yan fight, I think, because he was warned several times for fingers out, and Felder was like,
All right. So we got one question left. Who's asking this one? I'll throw it out there. All right. So after Linton Vassell's victory over Valentin Moldanovsky, Moldavsky. Almost messed that up. Do you think he is going to be the one to dethrone Ryan Bader at heavyweight?
Yes. Heavyweight Linton Vassell is the truth. In hindsight, he wasted 5 or 6 years of his career cutting unnecessarily to 205, making himself into a once or twice a year fighter, making himself miserable. He's faster at heavyweight, like relative to the people he's fighting. His gas tank is better. He feels more confident, just committing to trying to finish a fight, throwing out better output. He's just a better fighter at heavyweight. And I think his escalator is headed one direction while Bader's might be headed the other. I think Vassell knocks Bader out. Okay. Vassell, This is going to sound terrible. Vassell for an Englishman is a pretty good wrestler. I don't think it's an automatic that Bader is just going to be able to put him on his butt like he did everybody in a Grand Prix that was almost 5 years ago. You know, like I think Vassell handles Bader.
Yeah, my buddy and former Vice Sports colleague Jack Slack is singing Linton Vassell's praises, and for good reason. And there's something he pointed out on his most recent show, is that Vassell's ground and pound is top notch. It's top of the top. And, you know, even if he struggles to get it there or whatever, once he's on top, able to do damage, oh my gosh, he put Moldavsky, a guy that had never been finished, if I remember correctly, out with 3 punches and 2 elbows. We're talking a guy who is he's going to make Ryan Bader have to eat strained peas and carrots for 6 months because of what he does in the ground when he gets up there. Holy smokes. And you know what the best part is? Linton Vassell's only 39. Like, Czech Congo's in his 50s and still competing. I mean, he's in his 40s and still competing. So Linton Vassell has 5 more years at the top of heavyweight, and bring on the Linton Vassell era. Let's get weird.
Yeah, I think this is a good thing for Ryan Bader, even as champion at Bellator. I mean, to talk to him, you know, before and after the last Fedor fight, it's like he almost gives off the vibe that he's bored with what's going on there, and he's getting all these rematches. And yes, Linton Vassell is a rematch, but at least it's a rematch with a different wrinkle to it. It also is out of the Fedor sphere. Like, it's not someone that's one of his training partners or proteges or whatever. So this is different. I think this will excite him. You know, I think this is something a challenge that he really can show up for and feel like he's the champ and not sort of the sideshow to the heavyweight goat, one of the heavyweight goats.
Stop feeling like he's in some like Cold War era comic book. It's like,
yeah, it's like
this month it's Bader versus the other Red Menace.
Yeah, it's like oh my god, like how many Ivan Dragos are you guys gonna dig up here?
I you know, it's funny, I forgot they fought, and then I realized, oh, it was a 205.
It was.
This is a whole different monster here.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, fellas. Well, Ben Henderson laid down the gloves after getting defeated by Usman. Usman or Umar? Usman. Usman. Okay.
Yeah.
The names, man. The names. Usman Nurmagomedov on Friday evening. So now let's assuming this retirement sticks, which I think this will with Ben Henderson. He seems to be a very intelligent, thoughtful person with things ahead of him in his life. Let's wax poetic on his career. How will you remember Bendo?
One of the greatest lightweights of all time, obviously, full stop. A guy who leveraged a really unique skill set. Like, some of his fights were incredibly exciting appointment viewing. Like, you know, the Showtime kick fight had been a sensational fight right up until the end. Some of his fights were not appointment viewing because of his unique skill set. Like, his unique set of skills was, I'm this incredibly like rubbery grappler who's a good offensive and defensive wrestler and impossible to hurt on the feet. So he brought a lot of anti-MMA to the cage for somebody who looked like a cage fighter out of Central Casting. I mean, you know, like this super good looking, athletic, like model looking dude with just a few tastefully chosen tattoos and some signature moves and the toothpick that were like built for being in a video game. Gave some unvideo game like fights and won some iffy split decisions, but that shouldn't take away from his greatness. Like, he fought the best fighters in the best division in the sport for like a decade and a half and won a hell of a lot more than he lost. Like, what a legend.
I have him as the number 3 lightweight, period. Like, I don't, it's hard to debate. I mean, unless you put Gomi high, which I can understand. But for me, it's Khabib, BJ, and Ben Henderson. And then Frankie, and then maybe Eddie or Gomi, probably 5, something like that. If I had to make it up on the spot. Because his longevity, his ability, his skills, the way he approached the fights, and I mean his slate that he ran into. Like if you really look at his, you know, a line of opponents back to back, it's lunacy. He was always on the top of the world. He never was I mean, and the fighters aren't afraid of anything. They're fighting, they're risking their lives in there, et cetera. But he went up to welterweight just because. And then obviously it doesn't hurt or increase his lightweight abilities or accomplishments. But what he did was just for all those years, being on top for that long over that division is remarkable. Like he still has the UFC record for the most consecutive title defenses at 3. That's it. Lightweight doesn't have champions that defend a long time. It's a revolving door. It's always been that way. So for him to have that record tied with a couple other names is special. And he did it, whether you agree with the decisions or not. There are official wins on his record. And he was the end. He's about the end of an era. There's not much left in the WEC era. And it's kind of bittersweet, but it's probably about time.
You know, I think beyond the fact that, like, from a stylistic standpoint, like Ben Henderson was just like a weird guy to game plan against. I think he was like the precursor to some of the fighters that we've seen to different degrees of success. First thing I think of, Phil Davis and Aljamain Sterling, the wrestlers who have excellent kicking ability. Two things that just don't seem like they should blend. I mean, Benson Henderson was able to come into the cage and display the top level of MMA wrestling along with the top level of kicking ability. And that is an extremely strange combination to prepare for and led to some really interesting moments throughout his career. Additionally, I think he has one of the most impressive rogues galleries in the lightweight division's history. So just to give you a glimpse of some of the names that he has defeated. And at the time when he beat these guys, like they were top-notch prospects or champions or someone within the top rankings. Shane Roller, Anthony Njokuani, Cowboy Cerrone several times, Jamie Varner, a former champion as well, Anthony Pettis, Frankie Edgar, Clay Guida, Jim Miller, Gilbert Melendez, Josh Thompson, Rustam Kabalov, Rafael dos Anjos, Michael Chandler. The Masvidal fight was 170, but we'll throw Masvidal in there as well. Patricky Pitbull, Roger Huerta. He has fought a who's who of notable names at lightweight, and for the most part, got his hand raised in those contests, and a lot of those times for the top stakes. So and then on top of that, I think it's also important to recognize when someone we spend so much time on this show and other platforms that we appear on or write for or whatever, talking about the misdeeds of fighters, the guys who got to the top or got a little money in their pocket and started acting like asses, or the ones who already were and they were just the wrong people to boost in this sort of platform. Ben Henderson is not among that. Everything that we know about him, and I'll say for the times that I've encountered and spoken to him, a gentleman, someone who has shown himself to be a good role model to people coming up in the sport and has done a great job of mentoring fighters as well. Think about his mentorship of like Korean Zombie and you know, and what's my man's name, Henry Corrales, like. This is a guy who has passed on his wisdom to the next generation, in addition to competing with them. So I think when we say the name Ben Henderson, we need to recognize that this is one of the best men to ever do it, all across the board. So I hope this retirement sticks, because I don't want to get to a point where it's like, this is sad. And I'm glad he's smart enough to recognize, okay, like it might be time to dial it back. You know, and we can look at his losses in recent years, but for the most part, he was fighting the best of the best that was in front of him. So no shame in those. So happy retirement to Ben Henderson.
People forget when he joined Bellator, he fought for the welterweight title. I forgot that when he was fighting Koreshkov, it was for the title.
Yeah, he left the UFC on a win. Like that was a rare thing in that moment. He left the UFC on a win. The one thing I forgot about this entirely. When I'm looking through his his Tapology page and council bouts, man, we never got the Thiago Alves fight. I forgot all about that one. And Eddie Alvarez.
No. Didn't get
And of course the TJ Grant bout, because Grant never made good on his title shot. So Ben Henderson, one of the best to ever do it. Look forward to seeing, because he's going to be coaching his wife as she embarks on her career. He's still, one of the top guys at his camp that's going to be helping everyone else. And I'd like to see him dividing his energy between his fighting and mentorship. Without that, we're talking about a guy who really could be a factor as a coach if he decides to go down that route. So hats off to Bendo. All right, gentlemen, before we go and conclude the show with some UFC 286 talk, it's time to perhaps the most wonderfully titled segment in all of media history. Let's give it some love here. I'm Not Surprised, Mr. Falcons, where we share something that surprised us or ironically did not since we last met. Jay, I'll begin with you. What's your I'm Not Surprised, Mr. Falcons this week?
I am very excited. The title of the event, okay, March 31st at the Illusion Nightclub in Phuket, Thailand. FightCircus 6, The Rise and Fall of Sloppy Balboa is the name of this event. Will be headlined by a Siamese boxing match, which means the two gentlemen are taped together in a big shirt with gloves on. The main event will be Bob Sapp and Rampage Jackson versus John Nutt and Andrew Wood, who is a friend and giant heavyweight fighter.
Where the fuck are they going to find a shirt that fits Bob Sapp and Rampage Jackson inside it at the same damn time? That is a tent.
Do you know how here for it I am? 190%. Like, I don't care what the rest of the fight card is.
I'm in.
That's it. That's it. That's all. That's the whole thing.
Shut it all down.
Yeah.
Combat sports has reached its apex.
Yeah.
Oh man, shut it down. Yep. Ben, which I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcons. Yeah, I know, right?
Well, I want to stitch back to the thing we were talking about at the very beginning of this show, the situation that Aljamain Sterling and Merab Dvalishvili now find themselves in, because right on cue, I am not surprised, Mr. Falcons, Dana White pulls out the usual playbook that comes up when matchmaking does not, the skies don't part and clear for him exactly as he envisions it. He bullies, he threatens, and then we get the classic, I guess he just doesn't want to fight. If you don't want to fight, I can't book a fight for you. And you can hear him already gearing up and like revving the rear wheels to say that about Merab and Aljo. Like with his vaguely threatening quotes at the post-fight presser, like it would go really badly for him. Like this, you sound like a Bond villain. You sound like a mobster shaking somebody down for protection money. Well, it could go really bad for you. If you don't want to fight your teammate. Like, this is literal villain shit. And I guarantee you, if something else doesn't happen to clear up that situation, you'll hear Dana say, well, Merab just doesn't want to fight. I can't book a fight for someone if he doesn't want to fight.
Yeah. Yep. We kind of know the script at this point. So
yeah.
At least we, you could just pre-write the article and just hit submit when he actually says those words. All right. Well, I'm not surprised, Mr. Falcons moment also comes courtesy of one Mr. Dana White. And this is really a byproduct of his sort of sideshow, the Power Slap Championships. They had their finale, their season 1 finale this Saturday after the UFC fight was concluded. And this was the reason why the fight was not at the Apex Center, because the Power Slap finale was being held at the Apex Center. So I bring this up to say, well, they were originally supposed to be on pay-per-view for reasons that Dana wants to pretend like the media forced this. Like, no, the product sucks. No one was going to buy it. So they put it on Rumble, which from my understanding is like this conservative app by conservative read white nationalist app that hosts a lot of stuff in that world. Well, in case you didn't know that about Rumble, perhaps if you were looking at the live chat as the show was going on, you would have been reminded very harshly by the constant use of racial epithets, constant use of homophobic slurs, and xenophobic language. Pretty much any ism you can think of, other than the one you smoke, available in the comment section. So can't say I'm surprised by that, nor am I surprised by the revelation revealed by our good friend of the show, frequent guest, Matt Wells of MMA Junkie, who decided to do a little bit look into some of the tweets that were flashed upon the screen during the show. And man, a lot of those accounts don't really exist. Nor do those accounts ever show that they tweeted these things. And these accounts also have like 20 followers each. So what's really going on, fam? Not surprised. So, gentlemen, that's going to do it for this part of the show. Now let's get into UFC 286, which is going to take place live from London, which I got to say this right now. I tried to book Oscar on the show this week because he's a UK guy. I'm like, all right, this would be appropriate to have him back on. And he reminded me, like, hey, I'm going to London. I was like, oh, that's right, the fight, the fight that. And he's like, you didn't remember? Like, hey, I kind of forgot, despite the fact I reached out to you because you are from the UK. I didn't put the other part of the puzzle together. So yeah, sorry, Oscar. But anyway, UFC 286 taking place. Leon Edwards will be defending the title he just snatched from Kamaru Usman months ago in his home country. We got some fun stuff to talk about. Now, first up, if the UFC still named events, what would you call UFC 286?
Bellator 286. I'm sorry, this shit just feels like a Bellator Europe card. It's got a couple of hot fights at the top and then a bunch of people that only ever fight for the UFC in Europe on the bottom. A bunch of the card is 10 miles long and it's got debuting fighters, a lot of whom are not going to turn out to be up to snuff. Like it feels like a Bellator Europe card.
All right, Jay, what would you call UFC 286?
I'm going to get in trouble, but I don't care. UFC 286 Euro trash.
All right, I guess I'll give it a go. UFC 286 cheap airfare. Not a whole lot of travel expenses that they had to pay for this one, so
we'll send the shuttle bus around.
All right, fellas. So I think by the title of the event that we were giving it, I think I kind of know where we're headed on this question. But outside of the main event, what do you rate this card?
D. I mean, it does have a couple of legitimately interesting prospects coming up, you know, from the UK. This kills me because there are two different Christian Leroy Duncan, the middleweight, is actually going to be really, really fun for as long as he lasts. And I think he might be more than just a bonus collector, you know, that goes like, you know, 6-4 in the UFC. He seems like the kind of knockout artist that can probably deal with people trying to take him down. So I'm excited for that. But a lot of this is just like bringing back Veronica Macedo.
Dude, I didn't realize she's been gone for like 4 years.
She retired because she had concussion symptoms.
Oh, that's...
I mean, Juliana Miller's not going to make those worse.
No.
But considering considering that Macedo has a history of like rolling for low percentage knee bars and shit against bad fighters and losing, Miller's going to clean her clock. Like if you roll and intentionally end up underneath Juliana Miller, this fight's over.
Yeah. It's
Why are they doing this to Dan Hardy, his lovely bride?
because he's not working for the OC. He's going to be watching in terror.
Are they literally doing this to like do Dan Hardy dirty? That's petty as shit. Wow.
That wouldn't surprise me one bit.
I wouldn't at all be shocked. Like they're bringing in Yanel Ashmos, who is a guy who didn't get signed on the PFL Challenger Series. Like he didn't even make the cut for the PFL, and yet he's making his UFC debut against Sam Patterson, who is he was on Brave for a while, right? Brave, I think he was.
He was on the Brave high altitude series.
Braves, the lightweight champ, I think. Yeah. Anyway, I want to be excited for this fight card. I really do. But is this the best foot forward? This feels like UFC Stockholm, except for there's a title fight on top.
Yeah.
Like I'm not wishing it, but you know how it goes. If something happens to the main event, you kind of almost have to cancel the card. You can't sell Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev for a 3-rounder as a pay-per-view.
You already can't sell this. There's a reason they put this 2 weeks after another pay-per-view card that had far more interest at the top, and 1 week after a shockingly loaded fight night card. They buried this event.
Big time. And I think it's important to know too, if you take away the main event and you just look at the main card, that's a solid fight night.
Yeah, sure. That's what I mean. Like UFC
Stockholm.
Yeah.
But I mean, but is it $80? No, it is not. It is not. It's not $80. And that's, I mean, we're talking about Gunnar Nelson on a main card. We're kind of removed from the days where Gunnar Nelson was like a draw, or like it's a guy who's going to make you tune in. We're gonna watch. Like Gunnar Nelson is still a good fighter, but this feels like something that should have happened years ago. Gaethje Fiziev is a great fight. And Nelson and Barberena promises fireworks, but even Vettori and Roman, that should be a fun fight too. But $80 of fun? No, sir at all. All right, fellas, so let's go ahead and ask the age-old question: who you got? Marvin Vettori against Roman Dolidze. Ben, who you got?
I got Vettori in this one. I was a little surprised that he's a 3-1 favorite, but I do favor him here. Marvin Vettori is what he is, and Marvin Vettori is a sledgehammer. He doesn't have finesse, he doesn't have nuance, but in the UFC middleweight division, if it's a job for a sledgehammer, nobody's going to beat Marvin Vettori at it until I see them do. Like, he's been beaten by niftier strikers that he can't get his hands on. That ain't Roman Dolidze. Dolidze is a brute too. And while he has overperformed compared to how I figured he would when he got to the UFC, especially dropping to 185, I think here's where he hits the wall. Pulling off a pro wrestling finisher on Jack Hermanson was maybe my favorite in-cage moment of last year. But it wasn't a fluke. He knew exactly what he was doing, but it would take a lot for him to get into a situation to do something like that to Marvin Vettori. I think Vettori probably just denies the takedowns, beats him up on the feet and in the clinch, and wins a grindy but clear-cut decision.
Jay, who you got?
It's always weird to think of Marvin Vettori as a power guy, because he is, except for when it really counts on the striking. Like, this is a guy who we always discuss, like, the grades of power, of like stinging power, of stunning power, of knockdown power, and knockout power, and those different categories. Maybe he has stinging power, but as a 185er, I think it's in the minus territory. Mm-hmm. It's more volume and clubbing strikes than actual damaging blows. And I looked to when I thought of this fight, I looked to what happened. It was a 205, and there were some weird things that happened there too, of course. But I view it as a wish.com version of Vettori versus Paulo Costa. And I think that Dolidze is going to blitz a lot, like that high energy, I'm going to run at you and kind of swing my fist at you and maybe level change when I push you against the wall. But Vettori's not going to fall for that. And Vettori's fought better, harder hitting strikers. So this isn't going to be the time where it's the plunk, it's over kind of situation. And you know what else is weird to me? And I always marvel at this. Vettori's just 29. I feel like he's been fighting forever, but he's now entering his prime. Whereas Dolidze is 34, 35, I think. And his physique and his power is going to nosedive. Yeah, I got Vettori by decision here.
Yeah, it's very difficult for me to go against what you two are saying. It just makes all the sense in the world. Like, to beat Marvin Vettori, you've got to have more finesse. You've got to be more technically sound. Roman is not that guy. He's not that guy. And when faced with guys who are sort of similar to him, Vettori can kind of code switch. He can become a chameleon. Like against someone like Apollo Costa, he can become the more technical guy. He can slow the thing. He can slow the fight down. Against someone like Kevin Holland, he can just out wrestle you. Like he's able to do things to kind of match the energy of whoever he's fighting, unless they are this highly technical striker who has good takedown defense. I think this is going to be a pretty clear-cut one for Vettori. I think he should cruise to a decision here. All right, gentlemen, we've got Justin Gaethje and Rafael Fiziev in the co-main event. Who you got?
Oh man, I think this is going to be where the beginning of the incredibly fun Justin Gaethje experience in the UFC kind of takes its first nosedive. Gaethje has already overperformed enormously compared to how I thought he would when he got to the UFC. He came to the UFC undefeated, outgoing World Series of Fighting champion, but a guy who was exciting to his own detriment and seemed to fight down to his level of competition. I thought, okay, a future UFC champ does not have a pair of super exciting fights with Luis Palomino. Like that doesn't compute. And when he got to the UFC, and yeah, he beat Michael Johnson, but that was after getting into some trouble and obliging Johnson with, a wild brawl. I figured, yeah, he's going to go 2-4, win bonuses in all 6 fights and then wash out. So he's already done more than I thought he would, but he's been knocked out a bunch of times. He's been hurt even in his victories. And here he's going to have the straight power advantage. I mean, he's still one of the hardest leg kickers the sport has ever seen. Still has as much crushing one-shot power in his fists as anybody in the lightweight division, but he's facing just a much, much more advanced striker. And I think Rafael Fiziev is going to tune him up. I would expect Fiziev to win the first round handily, probably knock him out in the second. And he may even measure him for something nasty like the spinning wheel kick that he used to put Brad Bedell away. We're talking about a guy that's like one of the instructors at Tiger Muay Thai and fights like it.
Jay, who you got?
When I look at striking contests, which this of course is, there's no threat of the takedown here.
But Gaethje's a former All-American wrestler.
Oh, yeah, boy, oh boy. Has he even attempted to take down his UFC career? I don't know, maybe by accident, or like they thought he was, and he was actually just stumbling.
He was
forward.
actually concussed and falling forward.
Right, exactly. Right, exactly. This is a guy who, when he gets rocked, he doesn't do the panic takedown. This is a guy who does like the panic brawling. Is that a thing? Kind of, I don't know, but it works for him. It works so well for him. When I look at a striker versus striker contest like this, I look at the fundamentals versus the flash and the finesse. And, you always like to kind of gravitate towards somebody who is really good at a couple things versus pretty good at a whole lot of things. And Justin Gaethje is he bread and butter? His striking arsenal isn't very diverse, but it's all effective and it's all hurts. Whereas Fiziev can go for a spinning wheel kick, chain it into a flying knee with a step and elbow. He's a Tekken character compared to Justin Gaethje. He's a punch out character. And it's going to catch up to him. It already is. Gaethje, we know that it's starting to slow him down. I mean, Charles Oliveira was the one who put him down before choking him out after dropping him a couple times. To me, this is a firefight that the wheels are not off the wagon, but they're going to be in like 2 fights. So mark me down as a plus 195, pretty not too bad upset for Justin Gaethje's final really good performance before we go, he needs to stop. And I think he can get past Fiziev, pressure him. When Fiziev goes for his spinning stuff, Gaethje's on him, or he's kicking the plant leg, which is going to take that out of it. I think the leg kicks are going to be a major factor, and I think Justin Gaethje is going to get this fight done. I think this is the last gasp, which sounds weird because he's going to be fighting tooth and nail until he's, hamburger. But this is the one where you go, okay, he's pretty great, but.
Oh, well, looks like I'm the tiebreaker here, and I got to side with Ben. I think Rafael, just programmed.
Yeah, I said it too.
Just so programmed. Rafael Fiziev, I believe will win this, and I believe he'll get the finish too. This is most likely going to be a striking battle, as all three of us agree upon. Justin Gaethje, for all of the power, for the leg kicks, for everything that he does right, I just see Fiziev being better. The only thing that he doesn't have more is the power. Like that's really it. And Gaethje's got, at this point, a pretty compromised chin. He can take a lot of damage, but at some point it's gotta stop. Like it's gotta stop. We even look at Gaethje's leg kicks. All right, you're gonna rely on leg kicks against the Muay Thai instructor at Tiger Muay Thai, a gym that is renowned worldwide for the high level of kickboxing acumen these guys have. Their instructor, you're going to land leg kicks with consistency on? I don't know. I think he takes a big check and things start changing for him. When it comes just to the hands or just to kicks anywhere but the legs, I mean, he's just such more of a technician. He's not only does he have the power, but he's got the finesse in his defense. He's not a guy who's just going to stand there with his chin out and just be ready to take 6 so he can land his 1. He's not that dude. I think if Justin Gaethje were to win this fight, it means he's going to remember something that he has seemed to forgotten long ago, and that is that he has some sort of background in wrestling that we hear about but have never actually seen. So just a quick look at UFC stats right here for Justin Gaethje. His takedown accuracy is 0%. And do you know why? Because he has attempted an average of 0 takedowns for every 15 minutes of action. Yeah. Why would he suddenly unveil his wrestling credentials now? When you look at some of the people that he's fought that he on paper should be able to out wrestle, like a Cowboy Cerrone, like an Edson Barboza, like a James Vick, no takedowns. He just stood and traded with them. I don't see why he dust off the singlet this time, unless we're going to see sort of an evolution from him that we got a bit of after the losses to Poirier and Eddie Alvarez, where he started getting a little more cautious, and that opened up the door for the next chapter. Unless he's changing chapters again, he's not going for a takedown. He's going to leave himself open. Fiziev should get a very beautiful knockout. And I agree with Ben. I see it happening in the second round.
If you're using the stats to make this picture, Gaethje is historically a more accurate striker, a more active striker, and surprisingly, I did not think this, a more defensively sound striker in terms of numbers flying at him versus landing than Fiziev so far.
But you
also Bobby Green had a good day on him.
Yeah, you gotta look at Bobby Green. Is one of the more impressive technical strikers in the UFC and has been for a very long time. Sure. But also you look at the type of fights that Gaethje gets into.
Oh yeah,
part of those reasons is because he's in your face and it's just swinging, and a lot of times the guys are swinging right back. Dustin Poirier and Eddie Alvarez, for instance, and Michael Johnson, like they're throwing right back at. So they've agreed to this type of fight.
And you don't think Fiziev's going to oblige? He's going to be smart and
no. I think Fiziev is too technically sound to oblige. I think even if he tries to oblige, it's going to be too much technique in what he does. It's going to be too many wrinkles to his game that the other guys that he has faced on the feet are weren't capable of doing. So Fiziev wins this one, in my opinion. Gentlemen, now it's time for the trilogy fight. Leon Edwards, your welterweight champion, in his first defense against the former welterweight champion, Kamaru Usman. Jay, who you got in this rubber match?
My heart goes out to Leon Edwards. Truly, unmistakably, across the board. Not in terms of fandom, but in terms of what must this guy do to be the king of the mountain. Like, this was a guy who was disrespected with his ridiculous win streak He gets up there, and yes, fine, he was losing the fight. Knocked out Kamaru Usman. Knocked him out. KO, head kick, smelling salts, whatever you want to say. For a guy who had never been finished with strikes. And his reward is he has to fight that dude again just to hold on to his title. Like this is the cleanest possible thing for me to go, okay, the UFC clearly wants a person to be champion, and it's not Leon Edwards. Edwards was overperforming, but one thing I said when we broke down the fight was the truest of truest of truest. I still had Usman winning, but I said Edwards is going to be the first person to take Usman down, and he did. Now, granted, it wasn't long. It didn't have much of an appreciable effect. It was kind of like DC taking down Jones that one time. And we go, hey, he did it, yay! And then, the rest happens. Edwards had about the best possible fight he could have had up until knocking out Usman. And he was still losing the fight. Like he shucked off a lot of takedowns, but not enough of them. He was controlled for long stretches of the fight. And I don't know if he'll be able to do that again. I don't think he'll be like, it wasn't a fluke. The head kick was set up. This wasn't a Hail Mary head kick, which I don't think is a thing. You're trying to kick a guy in the head. It's not like an accidental up elbow with 4:59 of a fight that you were losing like Rodriguez. This was a intentional setup move. I think Usman's going to be tighter on him. He's going to give him less space to breathe. He's going to frustrate him, and he's going to not stay at open range enough to get head kicked again. It's going to be the British fans are going to be ticked off 49-46 decision for Usman, and where there's going to be boos. And when he wins and gets his hand raised, we might not be able to hear him because the crowd will drown him out. But Usman, I think, will become champion again.
All right, Ben, who you got? Oh, you're muted.
I'm on board with Jay. I look back at that first fight and just have to think, what did each guy have to take back to the drawing board? And for Usman, it's, well, do that same thing, only keep your hands up in the fifth round. Because up until then, he was not only winning, he'd been rolling downhill. Like he was putting, it wasn't a rout. The wheels hadn't fallen off the wagon. If you asked me before round 5, I wouldn't have said either guy was going to get a finish. Like it's not like Edwards was in desperate straits, but everything was trending towards Usman until that shocking reversal. So Usman has the book written. He's like, okay, just got to be careful. Edwards is like, okay, I have to avoid being completely drowned while creating as many of those moments of opportunity as possible. It requires him to thread the exact same needle again. And like Jay said, it's not a fluke. It is a strike that he had been setting up throughout the fight, but it still feels low percentage. The only thing that gives me pause is if Usman, now 7 or 8 months older and 35 years old, a titanic welterweight with a serious weight cut, and I know this wasn't his first career loss, but the end of an incredible streak of wins. If there's any slippage in his preparation or motivation, if he had a brutal weight cut coming into this, if his head wasn't completely there, I mean, he's gone Ronda Rousey style radio silent since that first loss. If there's anything going on there, then it's a whole different question, but I'll believe that when I see it. Cause normally Kamaru Usman is not a man who lacks for motivation. Like he's clearly a driven guy. So I think we get 25 minutes of what we got 23 and a half minutes of last time. Give me Usman by a pretty dominant decision.
Yeah, it's once again, it's very difficult to lay out a true case for disagreeing. My only caveat is same as yours, Ben. Like, what version of Kamaru Usman are we going to see? Are we going to see someone who, after suffering such a devastating knockout, is just not the same guy due to the mental side of it. You stepping in there against the guy who just did that, and now just even it's entered the realm of possibility that can happen to you. So does he approach things differently? Is he cautious? Is he gun shy? But as far as just looking at things on paper, the blueprint to beat Leon Edwards, he set for, at least 3.5 minutes of their second fight. Oh, in addition to the 15 minutes prior, that in their first bout that he was able to beat him. So I think you just go back to that formula. I mean, as much credit as we can give to Leon Edwards for that head kick, I mean, that's not something that's going to land most of the time, even when it's set up. Because does Usman give him the opportunity to do it? Does he stand there in front of him like that? Probably not. I see Usman going out there from bell to bell, establishing his presence and making it very clear that Edwards is not going to have that easy of a time setting up a head kick on him like that again, which means that Edwards is going to have to have an answer for this incredibly high pace, this in-your-face wrestling game that Usman has. And we've seen that Edwards doesn't have the answer for that. He does not. Then it becomes when Usman gets a hold of him, is able to drag him down and brutalize him, is he satisfied with that decision win? I don't think so. I think he gets him down and he wears away at him, much like he did against Woodley when he won the title at UFC 235. But I think this time he makes sure that there's not a single judge that has to submit their scorecard. I see this being a ground and pound finish, late fourth is what I'm thinking here. I think Edwards gets dethroned in his home country, and the fans will be throwing whatever drink of choice into the cage. It's going to get messy. It's going to be a lot of fish and chips thrown into the octagon. So, yeah. So
it is very important to note, however, this event is going to air earlier than a normal pay-per-view. The early prelims start at 1 p.m. Eastern. Then the prelims at 3, the ESPN prelims, and the main card is at 5 p.m. Eastern time. So this isn't a 10 showing, which means that Ben won't have to stay up until 3 recapping the darn thing.
Yeah, that's nice. I'm not sure. I've got to talk to Dan. I don't know if we're doing the commentary for this one. We skipped it last time because he was in Vegas for 285, and we're having another pay-per-view so soon after this one. Oh, brace your wallets, gentlemen, that don't have that expense account that's going to pay you back. All right, so that's going to do it for this edition of the Living Death Show. Big shout out to Ben and Jay for once again holding it down, and you can check their coverage for UFC 286 on Sherdog.com. Of course, you can catch me on MMA On Point. So remember, like, subscribe, share, tell a friend to tell a friend, tell that friend to tell 10 more friends. Stay beautiful, stay positive, and stay sexy. See you when I see you. Peace.